Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. It is episode number 48. Guys, we are 2 episodes away. In 2 weeks, I think, we will be heading into episode number 50. That's just incredible, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, as always. And yeah, there's a ton of stuff to talk about. I say this every week almost, but there really is. And so I don't want to waste too much more time. Let's get our usual plugs out of the way. If you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, this is where you are listening to the pod. Thank you so much for joining. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below with what you think about any of these topics. There are time codes in the description as always. And if you are listening on Spotify, yes, we do have the Access Blockbusters Pod on Spotify. Make sure to leave a rating and let me know what you think about the podcast there. And again, this is going to be a jam-packed episode, so can't wait to talk about all these things with you guys. And without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so Agatha All Along has finished its run, but we're still here talking about it because there's a lot to talk about here. So we have some news that's kind of interesting because it's, on the one hand, it's something official that may mean something or may not mean something. And we're going to talk a lot this episode about things that may mean one thing or may not. You know, I think that you can always read into things as they come out, especially when it relates to Marvel. But there's some interesting stuff to talk about for Agatha All Along for sure. So the Emmys. For those of you who are unaware, the Emmys are basically the Oscars for TV. For those of you who are unaware of the Oscars, it's basically, the biggest event in movie awards, right? It's the biggest awards, the best picture, best cinematography. They have the hosts usually, although recently they haven't been having as many hosts. And the Emmys are similar, right? The Emmys have best series, best comedy series, best drama, and they have their best acting categories and whatnot. So there is that. But the way that, I don't know the exact intricacies of how everything gets submitted in the Oscars and the Emmys and how they're different and how they're similar. I know that they're voting boards and a lot of people from guilds, vote on these things. But anyways, there are processes by which you can nominate your film. You can, submit your film to be reviewed by these boards and by these guilds, and then they can decide to nominate you for these categories and these awards. And so Agatha All Along, right, the first season, has been submitted for consideration for Emmys. That's fine. I mean, I don't think it's going to win anything. Again, even the most avid fans of Agatha All Along, I think, would admit that it's probably not going to win, best series or best comedy series or whatever series it would win. But what's more interesting about this is not the fact that Marvel submitted. I mean, they submitted Hugh Jackman for Deadpool and Wolverine for an Oscar consideration. And while I love Deadpool and Wolverine, it's really fun, and I love Hugh Jackman. For those of you who don't know, Hugh Jackman is probably my favorite actor working today. It's amazing. I don't think there's any shot that he gets even nominated for Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor. But anyways, it's not the fact that they have nominated Agatha All Along, but it's under which category. They have actually submitted Agatha All Along to the Best Comedy Series category. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, Access Blockbusters, what's the big deal? Are you saying it's not a comedy? Is that why you're making the segment? No, not necessarily. I am making this segment because there's actually another category that Marvel very easily could have submitted Agatha All Along for. And in fact, if it was a certain way, probably should have submitted Agatha All Along for. And that is Best Limited Series. Now, limited series are essentially, there are different terms for it. You can have a mini series or whatnot. It's essentially a series that was only designed to be a certain amount of episodes in one go. It's basically one season. It's a mini series, however you want to frame it. There's not going to be a season 2. Right? It's just a limited series. And again, I mean, Marvel has had their limited series before. I think, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I think even WandaVision was a limited series. Loki obviously was not. Loki had a season 2. Hawkeye might have a season 2. Moon Knight might have a season. So, those shows, you leave the door open for season 2s, but you have had your limited series at Marvel, right, thus far. Shows that clearly we're not going to have sequel series for various reasons. WandaVision because she shows up in Doctor Strange 2, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier because he's going to get his own movie, Captain America, Brave New World. But Agatha All Along was not submitted under limited series. It was submitted under Best Comedy Series, which usually indicates that there is going to be a continuation. In fact, I think there's a stipulation in the rules that says you submit it in these categories if these are series in which the characters have the likelihood of returning for another season or in the future projects. Now, as far as I know, right? As far as I know, does this guarantee Agatha All Along season 2? I don't think so, because otherwise the headlines would have been, Agatha All Along, guaranteed a season 2. What I think this means is that Marvel is keeping the door open for Agatha All Along Season 2. Again, I don't think it necessarily means it's going to happen, but I think that what this does mean is that Marvel has not shut the door yet on Agatha All Along Season 2. And why wouldn't you, right? Because I think for the most part, people had a good time with the show. Again, if you didn't, totally fine. If you love the show and think it's the best thing ever, also amazing. Love that. I was someone who, was a little iffy towards the beginning, but I think really got on board towards the end of the series, and I liked it quite a bit. But I think that, the way that the series ended, no spoilers here, there's a very clear pathway towards a Season 2. Now, the way that the show ended, and again, we're not really here to talk about the plot details of Agatha All Along, but, just to give a minor spoiler alert for the ending of Season 1, if it is Season 1, the show ended on a little bit of a cliffhanger where the characters are now heading, I think, very clearly towards another adventure. The question then became, where was this next adventure going to take place, if anywhere at all? And with the success of the show, it seems like you surely have to pick up that storyline. Was it going to pick up in the White Vision series? Possibly, although that series feels a little full as it is already in terms of storyline. You have, Vision and Ultron, and I think you're going to have other characters. Maybe even Tommy Maximoff is going to show up in that show. Who knows? And if Tommy Maximoff shows up in that show, well, it seems like Agatha and Billy could, but also it might make even more sense if they just did Agatha All Along Season 2 at some point. And we know that Marvel has shifted their focus more towards actual showrunners and actual episodes of television rather than just doing the whole, let's cut up a movie into 6 parts, right? That's not really what they're doing anymore, and I think that's a good thing. So I think that for me, what this means is that Agatha All Along Season 2 is much more likely than it ever was even a month ago. And I don't think that it's guaranteed. I think that it's just that Marvel is keeping the door open because there are obviously many more stories to tell in this world. But I ask you guys, do you think Agatha All Along Season 2 is going to happen? Do you think that this storyline is just going to get resolved in the Vision series or in somewhere else? Or do you think it's just never going to get picked up? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, let's talk about our favorite Scarlet Witch in the MCU. Let's talk a little bit about Wanda Maximoff. So we're going to go over some comments that the showrunner of Agatha All Along, Jac Schaffer, made, and particularly one comment, but we're going to go over it, and I think it's interesting because it has some implications, or it may not. I think that there are a few ways to interpret this comment, and I want to talk about it in this segment. So this segment will contain very light spoilers for Agatha All Along, but if you don't want to know anything, if you haven't seen the show, feel free to save this to watch later and then come back to it once you have, because we'll be talking a little bit about what happens in Agatha All Along. So you have been warned. Agatha All Along, the big spoiler for this segment, Wanda doesn't show up, right? And they actually make some explicit references to Wanda Maximoff. They talk about the fact that they don't know if she is alive or dead. Actually, there's a point in episodes, I think 7 or 8, where Billy asks Agatha, so is Wanda dead? And Agatha says, yes, no, I don't know. And so they're really clearly toying with the idea that, the audience obviously wants to know, is Wanda Maximoff alive? And we're not going to really tell them, right? Whether or not Jac Schaffer herself knows, it remains to be seen, but we don't know if Wanda Maximoff is alive or dead. It seemed like from Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness that Wanda was very clearly dead. However, that has never stopped the MCU from bringing back characters from the dead. Loki has died 70 billion times, let's not forget. So if a character looks really dead, even if you see the body, I mean, in Infinity War, Loki was as dead, and they found a way. I know it's not the same Loki, but still, they found a way to bring Loki back into the MCU. So there is always a way, especially with the multiverse, to bring characters back. I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing. In fact, I would say that this has the potential to skew negatively just by bringing back characters from the dead all the time, but it is what they can do with the multiverse. Now, Jac Schaffer has been doing a lot of interviews post Agatha All Along, and she was asked specifically about Wanda Maximoff because there was a line in the final 2 episodes where they talked a little bit about Wanda Maximoff. And this is what Jac Schaffer said. I'm not going to read the exact quote, but I'm going to paraphrase. She said basically, it is her belief that Agatha Harkness does not know what the fate of Wanda Maximoff is, as indicated by the whole line of yes, no, I don't know. So Jac Schaffer says it is her opinion that Agatha Harkness does not know the status of Wanda Maximoff, and it is her opinion that Rio does. This is pretty obvious, right? I mean, Agatha might have her suspicions and whatever, but it seems clear that she does not know exactly what happened with Wanda Maximoff. And Rio is Death. So obviously Death should know if Wanda Maximoff is dead, at least in Earth 616. She should know if Wanda is dead. So that makes sense. But then Jac Schaffer, this is really what I wanted to talk about. Jac Schaffer then goes on to say something interesting. She says, I was instructed by Marvel to use the word gone and not dead. So here's an interesting scenario, right, that we have going on. Because Jac Schaffer is now in this territory. She's been saying this in interviews where she met Agatha all along, and obviously she had to collaborate with Marvel. Insofar as, Marvel had instructions for let's not use Mephisto, maybe, because maybe Mephisto shows up in Ironheart or whatever. She didn't actually say that, but this is my speculation. But, on top of the fact that she herself said she didn't find Mephisto particularly interesting, Marvel also was like, maybe hold off on that anyways. And so they, obviously whenever you come into the MCU, you have to collaborate with Marvel because they're telling a wider story. But, Jac Schaffer was able to pretty much tell the story that she wanted to with, limited restrictions. That being said, the status of a powerful character like Wanda Maximoff is obviously something that she is not going to have final say on. No matter how much, if she wanted to bring back Wanda Maximoff or not, that's a Marvel decision. So that's clearly something that Marvel is thinking about. So let's think about this quote, right? And its potential implications. Wanda is gone, not dead. That was the direct mandate from Marvel itself. This is coming from Marvel directly. What does this mean? First, so let's kind of go through some particular potential scenarios that this one quote might imply here. Scenario number 1, this implies that Marvel knows Wanda Maximoff is alive, and they're intentionally trying not to say that she's dead because they know that they're going to bring her back soon. So that's one scenario, right? And I will say, well, I'll go through all the scenarios and then I'll talk about, I'll talk during each scenario about what I think is the most likely. Scenario number 1 being, like I said, Wanda is alive and they don't want any show or movie to say that she's dead. I actually don't know that this is particularly I would not say that this is the highest likelihood option, honestly. And I'll go through some reasons why with the next scenarios, but I think that it's possible, right? If Wanda was alive, then sure. Go ahead, say that she's gone, not dead. But honestly, what's stopping Marvel from just saying that she's dead, right? And then just changing their minds later. Like, fans are not going to, get up in arms about the fact that they said she was dead in, Agatha All Along episode 8. And then later on in Avengers Doomsday, she shows up again. No one's going to be up in arms about that. It's, it's fine, right? So I honestly don't think this is the likeliest option, honestly. The other scenario that I find more interesting, and I think that, well, actually, there are 2 other scenarios. So here's the second one. The second one is not the one that I personally buy into. Here's the second one, though. Second one is that she's dead, and they just don't want to say that she's dead. They just want to use the word gone. I don't find this scenario particularly likely either because it seems like Marvel is choosing their words very carefully, and so they wanted Jac Schaffer to specifically use the word gone instead of dead. So I don't think that, they actually believe she's dead concretely, and they're just like, well, let's not use the word dead for whatever reason. I don't think that's the case. Scenario 3, though, is what I personally am buying into right now. And this is what I think is actually happening here. Again, just pure speculation based on what I think and what I've seen. Scenario number 3 is that they just don't know. And they want to leave the door open. Because the thing is, right, I don't think the word gone implies that she's alive or anything like that. I think the word gone is just intentionally ambiguous. And honestly, right now, I don't think there are plans to have Scarlet Witch come back in the MCU by the end of the multiverse saga. I just personally don't think there's enough time to do that. Maybe, sure, Elizabeth Olsen comes back in Secret Wars for a quick little cameo as a multiverse 838 Wanda or something like that. But to have her in a big role moving forward, I don't even think this is in their short-term plans. Now, long-term plans, because, the X-Men are coming, right? And Scarlet Witch, obviously in the comics, is a mutant in most iterations. So, obviously in the X-Men, in the upcoming mutant saga, if that's what they're going to do, there might be plans for Wanda Maximoff. And honestly, what I think this is that I think Elizabeth Olsen has not agreed to come back. I think that she's still kind of on the fence. She's been giving those quotes that Andrew Garfield was giving before Spider-Man No Way Home about like, well, maybe if the story's right or whatever, but never say never kind of thing. And I honestly think that as of this moment, Elizabeth Olsen herself does not know she's coming back as Scarlet Witch, which means Marvel doesn't know she's coming back as Scarlet Witch, but they want to keep the door open. So honestly, I think the most likely scenario coming from this quote is that Marvel doesn't know, but they are hopeful that they can bring Scarlet Witch back. And so they instructed Jac Schaffer, let's leave the door not open, but intentionally vague. If she never comes back, well, she's dead, guys, and we just use the word gone, but she's dead. If she does come back, well, she was there and she was just gone for a little bit. I don't think it matters, though. This is the big thing. I know it's kind of hypocritical of me to make a big segment about this and be like, it doesn't really matter, but I genuinely just don't think it matters because, guys, would it make a difference at all if they said Wanda's dead and then she shows up in the next project? What's the next project? Daredevil Born Again or Captain America Brave New World? She just shows up in a post-credit scene. It doesn't matter, because I don't think that at that point we're going to be talking about that. We're just going to be like, oh, they had plans at one point. Those plans changed. She's alive again. Okay, fine. We'll move on. I think that personally, I wouldn't read too much into this quote, even though I have just spent 8 minutes reading into this quote. But I just genuinely think that right now they probably don't know. And they're just leaving the door open for a potential return. But I ask you guys, do you think that this quote where Jac Schaffer was explicitly told to use the word gone instead of dead, do you think this indicates that Wanda is coming back? Let me know in the comments down below. And do you think that this means she's coming back imminently, or maybe she's coming back later on down the road? Let me know in the comments down below. But wait, everybody, hold your horses. There's actually more about Scarlet Witch. So I had recorded the first segment about how Jac Schaffer was talking about how Wanda was gone and not dead, at least as instructed by Marvel to say, and Agatha all along. And then I saw this news about Elizabeth Olsen saying she might come back as Scarlet Witch. I'm not so convinced. Kind of. So let's talk about it, because I think I might have a more unpopular opinion about what she said and what this means for the Scarlet Witch. So let's actually talk about the quote itself. So Elizabeth Olsen, who of course is the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, said recently in an interview, or I'll just read the quote out here because it's quite an interesting quote. So this is Elizabeth Olsen, and she says, quote, "Well, honestly, if I were to tell you exactly what I would want, I think it would maybe be spoiling something. Kevin Feige genuinely asks us what we want to do with the character, and then he does it. So I don't know if I can share. I just want to come back." So that is the exact quote. This is verbatim. This is not a scooper. This is Elizabeth Olsen saying these words. So just like how I did with the Venom 3 quote where Kelly Marcel was like, "Oh, I don't know, King in Black, Noel might be coming back." Let's kind of go through this quote, because on the one hand, right, it's not a great exercise to dissect words that people are just saying off the cuff. On the other hand, though, there are always things that are revealed when people are talking, especially when they're put on the spot like this. So let's go through the quote here and see, does this mean Elizabeth Olsen, Scarlet Witch, is going to come back? I say yes and no. Here's why. But first, let's go through the quote. So she says, "Well, honestly, if I were to tell you exactly what I would want, I think I would maybe be spoiling something." Okay, couple scenarios here, couple ways to interpret this. Number one, obvious one, she's coming back as Scarlet Witch, and she knows exactly what's going on, and she would be spoiling something. Does that necessarily mean she's coming back? Not necessarily, because, maybe Elizabeth Olsen is just a very honest kind of person. She seems like a very nice person, but Andrew Garfield lied to the media for months about Spider-Man, even though we all thought he was coming back. So even if she knew she was coming back, she didn't have to say that. So scenario one, sure, she knows exactly what's going to happen. She is coming back to the MCU at some point. That's probably more likely. On the other hand, Jac Schaffer has a pretty close relationship with Elizabeth Olsen. I heard that she sent Elizabeth Olsen pictures of Joe Locke wearing the crown, just to be like, hey, look, it's a similar crown to what Scarlet Witch wears. So perhaps Jac Schaffer had some insight, and she was like, oh, there's some interesting stuff going on, in the Vision Quest series, blah, 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 blah. And maybe she was like, well, maybe because the whole Vision Quest series is about Wanda's dead body. I don't know. It's less likely. I'm just saying this isn't a guarantee that she's coming back. I'm just saying that there are other plausible scenarios in which Elizabeth Olsen's like, well, I know some things about Scarlet Witch. Like Kevin Feige told me that, maybe Scarlet Witch's body is going to be a huge part of Doomsday. I don't know. I really don't know. But sure, I'm willing to acknowledge, as somebody who is like, I don't know if Elizabeth Olsen would be coming back, and I don't even know if it's a good idea, after having the character go through that much and then, having her come back. But I acknowledge this probably seems to lean towards the idea that, especially paired with the whole Jac Schaffer comments, that yeah, sure, she seems like she's coming back. But then let's read the second part of the comment. So Kevin Feige genuinely asks us what we want to do with the character, and then he does it. So, interesting. I think this seems to indicate then that if Elizabeth Olsen really wanted to come back, then she would be coming back. And I think that if Elizabeth Olsen... Now, it's not like Elizabeth Olsen can just walk up to Kevin Feige and be like, hey, I want to come back, bring him back. And he's immediately going to greenlight a Scarlet Witch movie. I don't think it works like that. I know that, Ryan Reynolds pitched Deadpool sequels for a long time. And Kevin Feige was like, nope, until we got to Deadpool and Wolverine. So it's not like he would automatically greenlight a Scarlet Witch project if she came up and asked him, but it does seem to indicate that if she did genuinely want to come back and she had some ideas for the character, then I think that he would be very receptive to that. And then she concludes this quote by saying, so I don't know if I can share, I just want to come back. So again, she wants to come back. So yes, as somebody who a couple weeks ago made the argument that I don't know if a Scarlet Witch movie is going to happen, I don't know if she's going to come back, not because I don't like the character. People misconstrue that and be like, well, you don't want her to come back because you hate... No, WandaVision, again, I said this before on the channel. I am one of the only crazy people who think WandaVision is the second best MCU project ever made. I'm going to die on that hill because, I mean, I could change my mind, but I think it is so incredible. I love Wanda Maximoff, and I'm also one of the few people who thought, well, I think the execution in certain places of the Wanda Maximoff character in Doctor Strange 2 was not as solid as it could have been. Conceptually, I don't have a problem with what they did in Doctor Strange 2. So, I'm just saying that as somebody who was fulfilled and satisfied by the arc that they gave this character, I just don't know if her coming back would cheapen that arc, if that makes sense. But it does seem like she has pointed to wanting to come back. Now, when I said earlier in the segment that I think yes and no, she's going to come back, I still think. So in terms of the first question, is she going to come back, yes or no? And give it a percentage. I would say 75% she's going to come back. But then the next question becomes, is she going to come back as the 616 universe Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch who died on Wundagore? I'm going to say no. I would not bet money on it. I would put it at something like 55% no and 45% yes. What I honestly think this is, I think, and I've heard this theory somewhere, that Scarlet Witch would probably be a big part of Avengers Doomsday, but probably not as the Earth 616 Wanda. In fact, I would think that maybe even a 38 Wanda could have a pretty big part to play in Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. But to come back as the Scarlet Witch full time, I just don't know. I think Elizabeth Olsen is at the place in her career where she wants to focus on other things. But if Kevin Feige kind of pointed to this and was like, hey, well, you can do something fun here in Avengers Doomsday. Why don't you come back for that? I think she'd be like, yeah, for sure. As long as she's not being tied down to 6 Scarlet Witch movies and 50 Scarlet Witch shows or something like that, I think she'd be game. So honestly, for me, I read these comments. Yes, I do think it's pointing to the fact that Elizabeth Olsen is going to come back as Scarlet Witch. But I also think it doesn't mean she's going to come back full-time as the Earth 616 universe. I still think it's going to be a multiversal variant as we close out the multiverse saga. But I ask you guys, what do you think about these comments? So now we have 2 segments here, 2 comments to dissect, one from Jac Schaffer and one from Elizabeth Olsen, talking about Wanda Maximoff. Do you think she's going to come back into the MCU? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, let's take a little bit of a break here. And, this is going to be a very Marvel DC focused episode of the Access Blockbusters pod because, WandaVision and Agatha all along and Elizabeth Olsen and Penguin. But let's take a little bit of a break here and talk about another property that I just adore, which is Stranger Things. I love this show unabashedly. I know that, it's one of those popular shows, right? It's what got Netflix super popular to begin with. I don't really care if, it's popular to hate it now or what. I love the show. I really love the show. It's in my top 3 shows of all time, I think. Maybe top 5. We'll see. But anyways, I've been on board with the show ever since probably the beginning of the pandemic. Around 2020 is when I saw the first 3 seasons. I love them. Couldn't wait for season 4. Watched season 4 in those 2 parts when it came out in, I believe it was 2022, right? Mid 2022, like something like May and July or something like that. Really amazing. I loved season 4 as well. They went even more horror with it, a little more sci-fi, but more horror with Vecna and the Upside Down and everything like that. So that was awesome. So we've all been waiting for Stranger Things 5, and it was going to take a while because this is going to be, sadly, the final season. Although there are going to be spin-offs and whatnot, but with the main cast, this is going to be the final season. All good things must come to an end. And, they've been filming for a while. I mean, they got shut down because of the writers and actors strike and whatnot. So they've been filming for a while. Also, these are just massive productions. If you guys remember season 4, the last episode alone was 2 hours. I think episode 7 was something like 80, 90, even 100 minutes long. It's crazy. I love how long the episodes are. They don't care. They're just going to make the show because it's Netflix's crown jewel. And they're just going to make whatever show they want to. And luckily, the Duffer Brothers are so talented and so such amazing storytellers that they just nail it every time. It doesn't matter how long the episodes are. The episodes are as long as they need them to be, which is awesome. And they're, by the way, Marvel, try making an hour and a half episode of television, see what happens. But anyways, yeah, so we've all been waiting for Stranger 5 news, and we finally have gotten kind of our first teaser trailer for Stranger Things 5. Now, when I saw the announcement come out the other day, I was really excited. I've been waiting for some kind of visuals about Stranger Things 5, and what is this? Is this our first teaser trailer? I clicked on it, I watched it, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a little disappointed. I would have liked to seen an actual teaser trailer, but it's fine because once I sat back and took some notes and kind of thought out what I wanted to talk about here, there are actually some really exciting nuggets here that we get to talk about on the podcast. And I think that we'll get our teaser trailer eventually. I'm sure the show isn't coming out probably until fall of 2025 is what I would imagine, maybe late summer. And so Still plenty of time to release as many trailers as you want from now and then. So let's go through. There are really three big reveals. Not big reveals, but three reveals, three things to talk about here in with this little teaser trailer. Two just kind of small things, and then one, being the episode titles. Obviously, that was the big point of the teaser trailer. So we'll talk about the episode titles at the end as the third point. But the first thing that is noticeable here is Stranger Things 5 is coming in 2025. And perhaps that is a no-duh kind of moment. But with a show like this, with how massive it's been, with how many delays it's gone through, I actually had heard for a while there were rumors that it might even get pushed to 2026. It kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until I was like, I'm just going to be happy when it does come out, And now we get confirmation it is coming in 2025. Now, this could mean a whole host of things. It could mean it's literally coming out in 13 months. It could come out Christmas 2025. We even got a little tease of Wonder Man, and Wonder Man isn't coming out until December 2025. So who knows what 2025 is. My suspicion, though, I think they wrap shooting. I believe they wrap shooting. I could be wrong about that. But my suspicion is that they'll probably do that same kind of model as they did before, where they released half the episodes. Maybe even they'll split it out even further. I would love a weekly style of episode for Stranger Things, because the episodes are so complete and whole on their own, but they lend themselves. They have such good cliffhangers at the end of each episode, so I love that about the show. But anyways, we'll see what Netflix decides to do. They were the binge streaming platform for a long time, and now they're slowly starting to break away from that. So we'll see. But 2025. It could mean anything. It could mean July. It could mean October. It could mean, I don't think it's going to mean March or April. I would say the earliest it's going to come out, earliest is probably midsummer of 2025. But still, it's really exciting. It's really exciting we got that confirmation. Second thing we get confirmed, this series takes place in fall of 1987. Now, I at first didn't quite realize the significance of this until I looked some things up and I read some other articles and realized that this means that this is going to take place a year and a half after Stranger Things 4. Now, Stranger Things 4 apparently took place in 1986, in the summer of 1986, and Stranger Things 5 taking place in fall of 1987 means it's going to take place about a year and a half after Stranger Things 4, which is interesting because we knew this was going to happen because, again, the actors are just aging. They're in their early 20s, I believe. They're growing up really fast. So you can't really pretend that this is all going to happen right afterwards. Who knows if they would have done the same thing if they were able to just have the actors look the same? Who knows? But anyways, there's a reason. There is one reason that they're going to make this time jump. It's interesting, though, because at the end of Stranger Things 4, it ended on such a not weird cliffhanger, but such an interesting place to then have a time jump for, because obviously the whole Hawkins is kind of consumed by the Upside Down in a weird way. So we'll see. We'll see what this means. But there is going to be, we knew there was going to be a time jump, and we now know it's going to be about a year and a half, which is a little bit over. It's, between season 4 and season 5 is going to be about 3 years. So again, a little bit over, but still in the realm of plausibility between those two seasons. So that makes some sense. And then finally, we get the big reveals. I think actually some of these episode titles, if not all of them, I think some of them at least, had been revealed before by the Duffer Brothers, but we get our full list of episode titles. So we get, I think there are going to be 8 episodes in the season. I'm just going to read them out. We get The Crawl is episode 1. Episode 2 is The Vanishing of Blank, although I believe we had gotten confirmation at some point, or maybe a rumor, that this was going to be The Vanishing of Nancy Wheeler. Very interesting. Episode 3 is The Turnbow Trap. Number 4 is Sorcerer. Number 5 is Shock Jock. 6 is Escape from Camazotz, I guess. Camazotz. Episode 7 is The Bridge, and episode 8 is The Right Side Up. So, again, I'm not going to play the game. What can you glean from these episode titles? Probably nothing. Hardly anything. I guess Nancy Wheeler is going to disappear. Obviously, there are some really interesting parallels. Obviously, episode 2 being called The Vanishing of Nancy Wheeler. If you guys remember episode 1, season 1, The Vanishing of Will Byers. So, there's a parallel there. The Crawl, no idea. Turnbow Trap, no idea. Sorcerer, maybe Will. Will was the sorcerer always in the D&D game, so that might be a Will episode. Shock Jock, Steve used to be a jock. He's not anymore. I love Steve. Everyone loves Steve. Escape from Camazotz, I don't know what Camazotz is. No idea. The Bridge, it sounds, that's what penultimate episodes are. They're usually bridges to the finale, so that makes some sense. And then I don't know. I'm a sucker for the episode titles that are kind of cheesy but just make sense, especially with these finales. And The Right Side Up, come on, The Upside Down, The Right Side Up. It's perfect. I love it. I know it maybe is a bit on the nose, but I don't even know what's going to happen in it. other than probably everyone's going to die. I don't know. I'm going to be sad. But yeah, I think that that's a great episode title, but nothing really to glean here. Just some interesting news, about Stranger Things 5 and just the fact that it's getting closer, guys. And I think in a few months, probably in a couple months in early 2025, we're going to get our first trailer and we're going to be off. And I'm really excited to just, learn a little bit about what the season's about, but not too much until the show actually comes out. So are you guys excited for Stranger Things 5? Did you check out the teaser trailer and what did you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below if you're excited for season 5. All right, guys, so the Penguin has been awesome. We've been loving talking about the Penguin here on the Access Blockbusters pod on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. It's been amazing, but, Matt Reeves has promised that this will not be the only show that will come out of the Batman universe. They've actually, originally, I believe, they planned to make an Arkham Asylum show, which I think would have been awesome. But then, for whatever reason, James Gunn decided that, this Arkham Asylum show, I think, would be part of the DCU instead of the Batman universe, which are going to be separate. I know a lot of people have talked about, is the Batman universe going to be part of the DCU? I personally don't see any world in which that makes sense, but I've had conversations with those of you in the comments who think that this is the best path, and I think that that's awesome that we can have that discussion. But I think the Batman universe, for me personally, is awesome as it is separate from everything else going on with James Gunn's DCU. Now, Matt Reeves, like I said, has been talking, and he said that they were going to make more shows. And now it looks like, from a report that, again, I mentioned this before, I don't talk about scoops as though they're news. However, there are people who have a lot of extensive knowledge with the insights into Hollywood that I wouldn't consider scoops. I would consider them, maybe not quite Deadline or Variety or The Hollywood Reporter. Like I mentioned before, those are sites that you should really trust when it comes to news in the movie industry, but rather, maybe a tier below. And Jeff Snyder is one of those people who usually has some pretty good knowledge of what's going on inside Hollywood. He actually, I believe he was one of the first people to to mention that Robert Downey Jr. was coming back to the MCU as Doctor Doom, and that was about a week before Comic-Con, and at that point I was like, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. It turns out it was true, and so he is generally pretty reliable. So he has an interesting story, and I'm not going to take this to the bank, right? This is not essential confirmation that this is going to happen, but he is saying at the next show, the Batman universe is going to revolve around Barry Keoghan's Joker. Now, Barry Keoghan's Joker was not really seen, but sort of heard, right, at the end of the Batman where the Riddler is in prison, and we hear him talking to the prison. It was one of those scenes, honestly, in the original Batman movie that I thought, you could have probably cut that out, because obviously it's really cool that we have a Joker in this universe, but at the same time, did it really do anything for the movie? Not really. And then, a few months later, a deleted scene was released, right, where we saw Barry Keoghan as the Joker. We didn't actually fully see him because the majority of the scene was framed in such a way where his face was blurred or we saw the back of his head. But we got to see a little bit more of him, and we got to hear his performances laugh, and it was great. I thought this is a very different kind of Joker. I think Jared Leto had the word "damaged" written on his forehead, even though he looked, I don't know. It was a very interesting Joker, but this character looked like he actually got dipped into acid, based on his hair and his skin and everything. So yeah, this was a crazy looking Joker from what little we could see. And Barry Keoghan is a fantastic actor, obviously, and I thought his performance was great. And so it seems like we're going to be dipping back into this character. Makes sense. He didn't really get a lot to do in the original Batman movie, and it looks like we're going to actually get a series with him. Now, is this a good idea? Honestly, I don't think we have enough to decide that. I mean, we have, the Penguin to stand on, which the Penguin is great, but it's obviously not going to be made by the exact same people. I don't think. It could be, but if it isn't, then, we don't know what the level of quality is. However, I think that with Matt Reeves at the helm, right, and just the level of success HBO has had, and the level of success that the Batman universe has had, I think that we have pretty good confidence in that, if Matt Reeves is going to make this series, he's going to make it good. So that's really encouraging. The other thing that we've heard recently is that there will be more series in this Batman universe, and also they will be very character focused like Oz. So if we are getting this Joker series, it's going to be very focused on Barry Keoghan's Joker. Now that's interesting because Joker stories, and we're not talking about the Joaquin Phoenix Joker because we can have this whole debate, but that really wasn't a traditional comic book Joker. And again, people have their opinions of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it just really wasn't the comic book Joker. But the whole thing about the comic book Joker in general is that most iterations don't have an origin story. So it's interesting because, even though the Penguin is not an origin story, the show, it's not an origin story for Oz, it still, has elements of his backstory, right, that are revealed about his brothers and what he's going through. So it's going to be interesting to see if they do make a Joker series, how far they're going to be willing to delve into this character. There were also reports that this character was going to appear in a small role in the Batman 2. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think this is interesting at best. And honestly, it's less about the Joker himself and less about Barry Keoghan himself and more about just the fact that this Batman universe has been just pumping out gold and it's been really successful thus far in delving into these characters and showing and telling really dramatic stories. So I'm really excited if that's the case, and I'll be excited basically whatever character they decide to focus on here. So guys, if they do make this Joker series about Barry Keoghan's Joker, what do you think it's going to be about, and are you excited for it? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, let's talk Penguin episode 7. I can't believe it. It's already coming to an end. I know we just wrapped up Agatha, but to think that now Penguin is going to be coming to a close pretty soon, actually next week, which it's just crazy. But, we'll have more TV to talk about. We have Dune Prophecy, Creature Commandos, and Skeleton Crew coming up. So lots of great, hopefully great, at least, television to talk about. I'm sure Dune Prophecy will be great. Have high hopes for Skeleton Crew, and we'll see about Creature Commandos. So lots to talk about. But we're here to talk about The Penguin. So this is a full spoiler discussion of episode 7 of The Penguin. If you have not seen the episode yet, just save this segment, save the podcast to watch later, and come back to it once you have already so we don't get anything spoiled for you there. So let's talk about episode 7 of The Penguin. This show has just been firing on all cylinders. I still think, I said this in my immediate reaction, I posted that as soon as the episode came out, and this is now more of a deep dive into the episode and kind of preparing us for the finale here. But, I said that I think the show peaked a little bit, honestly, with episodes 3 and 4, but that's not to say that these other episodes, 1, 2, 5, 6, 7 have not been great. I mean, it just goes to show you. I think episodes 3 and episode 4, and that was the Vic episode and the Sofia Falcone episode, were probably some of the greatest episodes of television I've ever seen, honestly. And so just to, to say that the show peaked there is no insult to the show at all. I mean, the show has been amazing thus far. And I just think that, the rest of the show kind of, I think by nature is building towards something, so it just feels a little bit more linear. Obviously, this episode was much more Oz-centric. We got a lot more actually, of his backstory, which I was asking about a couple episodes ago. I was wondering whether or not we'd see more about his brothers, and we do get to see more of his brothers here. But I mean, I think that, I think just because we had a Vic episode and then we had a Sophia episode, those episodes feel like they stand out more to me. But this show has just been awesome, right? This show has just been amazing thus far. And I think we're headed for an explosive finale. We'll ask the question, the B question at the end, and we'll talk about whether or not we think Batman will show up in the finale. I have my thoughts, but we'll get to that towards the end. So as always, I'll do a little bit of a play-by-play here as we go and run through this episode and kind of talk through what I was thinking throughout the whole thing. So as we start out, we start out with the music, right? And immediately I was like, oh, okay, so, we left off episode 6 with Sophia kind of standing over Vic and Francis, Francis Cobb. And so I thought, okay, we're going to pick up right away here. But it turns out this is a flashback. And the second this was a flashback, I knew, okay, we're going to actually get some backstory here between Penguin and I believe Jack and Benny, I believe are his siblings' names, his brothers' names. We're going to get some more backstory with them there. So we get to see the dynamic, right? We still don't see the father. And, I'm sure that, well, if they do a Penguin season 2, I'm sure that'll be explored at some point. I don't know if in this season, in episode 8, they're going to reveal who the father is. Maybe it's not important. It might not be important. But we see the mom, we see Francis, and then we see the 3 siblings here. And you can already tell there's a lot of tension going on here, especially from Oz's point of view. You can tell that he has this sort of a distant dislike of his brothers, and then he wants to be super close, uncomfortably close to his mother. But he doesn't, he doesn't let that hatred show, at least towards the very beginning here. So then we see the brothers heading out, and they go and meet Rex, who is that gangster I think that Penguin kept talking about throughout the beginning or the brunt of this series, and the one that he really respected and really liked. And then we see them playing tag, and it's really cruel because I think the brothers, right? We see the brothers really taking advantage of the fact that Oz is just not physically as capable as the rest of them, which I think he really resents from them, honestly. And that's just, it's really sad. It's a really sad thing to see. But then obviously that doesn't warrant what happens next, because this show continuously does this. And it's so amazing how it's able to just subvert expectations, because you're like, oh, he's going to be upset at his brothers or whatever. And then he just straight up murders his brothers. And, it's this interesting thing, right? Because, I mean, it is one thing to say, sure, Oz definitely had a lot of trauma, a lot of trauma as a kid, for sure. But on the other hand, it's almost even more heartbreaking to see these murderous instincts coming out when he's just a child. It's like, man, just the wrong combination of things here that created this person that is now Oz Cobb that we're following as Colin Farrell. And by the way, Colin Farrell, every single episode, more and more and more, give him an Emmy. I know we don't even know what the rest of the nominees would be, but just, oh my gosh, just give him an Emmy. Kristen Milioti as well. But I think Oz is really starting to take more of a front seat here in the show. I think Sophia had a lot more screen focus and screen presence in episode maybe 3, 4, 5-ish. But this is Oz's show now, and man, it's just crazy the things that he does. So this kid, he had this murderous instinct in him basically the whole time, and that's that's terrifying. My stomach was kind of turning, honestly, after seeing Oz just kill his brothers like that. That's crazy. And he doesn't, we see then the next scenes where he's watching the movie with his mom, and he just doesn't feel bad about it either, which is so terrifying. It's just a show about a bunch of cold-blooded people, and it's kind of a race to the bottom is what I said in my immediate reaction. I kind of stand by that. It's just, who can be the least bad, and they're all bad. I mean, they're all bad. It's really just who can come out on top, but also kind of a race to the bottom, if that makes sense. So now we have Frances, and she's in the Falcone home. We're in present day now, and I mean, she's just kind of roasting everybody here. She's very lucid, which is kind of interesting here. And then she just digs into Sofia Falcone as well, or Sofia Gigante, I should say. And, that was kind of terrifying to watch. I was saying this, it's like the two most terrifying female characters I've seen in a TV show in a long time, just going back and forth at each other in this room in this kind of game of cat and mouse and manipulations and roasts and digs and all. It was really kind of scary and fascinating to watch here. And then she kind of loses her lucidity at just the wrong moment, and that's when we bring in that Dr. Rush, who seems like there were some theories going around that maybe he's not a real person. He seems very real. I don't know, maybe even Frances is hallucinating him now. Seems pretty real, but yeah, she loses it at the wrong moment. And then she gets it back and she slaps Sophia, which was crazy, just a crazy move. So anyways, Dr. Julian Rush goes to Sophia and he's like, hey, remember that little girl you killed her parents, that, killed their entire family, but killed these girls' parents? Yeah, she's not doing well. Understandably, she's not doing well. And so then, we revisit this later on where Sophia goes to meet Gia is her name. And I think that was kind of a powerful moment that we'll talk about in just a second here. But anyways, now we have Sal, who comes and finds Penguin. So we don't see Vic in this episode, which is interesting. Vic kind of disappears, but we see Sal coming in for Penguin, and he's just going at him. He's letting out all of his anger for killing his family. And Penguin is still doing Penguin things, like provoking Sal for that. And so then there's this whole fight that happens in the facility where basically Sal is like, this is my operation now. And Penguin's like, yep. And then he starts a fight. And we have a one-on-one between Oz and Sal. And it looks like it's interesting. I need to rewatch this scene maybe to kind of figure out exactly what's going on here. Because it feels like, so Sal doesn't die by a stab wound or a gun wound or anything like that. He just kind of dies. I don't know if it was a heart attack or some kind of failure in his body or something like that, but kind of just doubles over and he dies. And on the one hand, at first, actually, I kind of thought Oz was disappointed almost. I thought that the dialogue and the reaction that Oz gave was almost insinuating that he was like, wait a second, that's lame. I wanted to kill you. What happened there? But then it seems like he kind of gets on board with it. And he's like, yeah, well, I beat you. And so then he seems happier with it. I need to, again, rewatch this scene to just kind of figure out because there's a complexity of reactions that are going on here from Oz, which is, again, huge credit to Colin Farrell. He's just amazing. So yeah, a lot of complex emotions going on here. But Penguin, he seems upset, but then also he doesn't seem upset. And then he's like, yeah, I beat you, Sal, which is, it's so interesting that it's always coming back to this idea of winning and being on top. And I beat you, Sal, which is such an interesting thing here. So, and now there's only one thing remaining right at this point. Now that Sal Maroni is dead, it is really just take down Sofia Gigante. So then we have this other, kind of subplot going on here where Sofia goes to meet Gia and, she completely ruined her life. And now she's entering this room and it's crazy because, at this point I'm like, Sofia, you're just being a terrible, terrible person. I mean, you literally killed this girl's parents and now you're like, well, you don't be so upset about it. They were bad people. And I'm like, that's awful. That's just terrible. And then she kind of turns around, right? And has this speech here where she's like, you deserve better. Go be and do something better. And then you see some genuine emotion out of her where it's almost like she starts feeling some kind of remorse here. And, I said this in my immediate reaction, but it was like, yeah, nobody in the show is a good person, but then you have these glimmers of genuine emotion that come out of them. And the conversation with Gia is it's so hard to watch, but then you just see this kind of remorse come out of her. And she has this honest moment with Dr. Julian later where she's like, I just want to be free. And so at that point I was like, oh, interesting. Maybe Sophia, because, the showrunners, I believe, and the writers had said earlier, like, it's called the Penguin, but the Penguin is probably, I'm not gonna say the antagonist, but it's sort of the opposition force, and maybe you should be rooting for Sophia. And I was like, interesting, because so far Sophia is also a terrible person. But then I was like, are they positioning her to kind of make a turn, to take down Oz's empire and come out on top as sort of this morally ambiguous person? And then she immediately goes into, I want Oz to suffer like I suffered. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're right back to it. So again, show is showing a lot of complex emotions and a lot of complex motivations here all bundled up. And it's just not easy to characterize these people and say, I want to root for, this is the hero, this is the villain, whatever. I mean, you thought a character like Batman in the Batman was complicated. No, these characters are so complicated. Again, not to excuse anything that they've done horrible, heinous, atrocious things, all of these characters, even Vic, which is really sad for me to say. But yeah, this is again a show about just a lot of terrible things happening to people, and happening from people who you could call terrible, but then also show really interesting glimmers of emotion here. So then Oz is like, hey, I killed Sal. I just want my mom. And it's a trap. We all know this is a trap. So I was like, okay, so what is Sophia going to do? Because Sophia seems like she's going along with it. And I'm like, how can you believe him again? How could you believe him again, right? Because he's betrayed you so many times before. But then there's this whole thing now where the car goes in. And the second the car didn't immediately reveal who was driving it, I was like, Sophia's not in that car. I knew immediately so she wasn't in that car. Now, my suspicion was, I actually did think, I kind of knew. So the first thing, I knew that she wasn't in the car. I also had a sneaking suspicion. It's a Trojan horse situation. It's classic, right? I mean, it goes all the way back to Greek literature, the Trojan horse, right? In the Iliad, I believe. And you bring the car in, and I knew that there was going to be a bomb in the car. I just knew it. I also actually kind of thought that she would put Francis's dead body in the car, which is maybe really morbid of me to say, but that's kind of where I thought this was going. And it turns out that she's just, I guess she needs Francis alive, because we see Francis at the end of this episode. And so yeah, I kind of predicted 2 out of the 3 things that would happen, but I thought a third thing would happen. And I guess they're saving some kind of confrontation here with Francis in the final episode. And I'm curious to see also, like I mentioned, that Vic didn't show up in this episode. And I'm curious to see where he shows up at the end of this show, and kind of what his final place is in this whole show, because I'm interested in the fact that Vic really wasn't a big part of this episode. This episode was also a bit shorter. Am I wrong about that? I feel like, because this episode ended and it was like, oh, like 45 minutes, which is fine. It's a good length for an episode. It felt long and substantial, but I feel like other episodes were 55 minutes, maybe an hour long. So interested in that. But then, the one final thing, because the show always has those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, like really, that's crazy. And it's that Oz hides in the same place. He runs from the bomb and hides in the same place where he killed his brothers. And that's crazy. It's just crazy. And then the episode ends, and there's going to be this confrontation now with Sophia, and I'm sure Vic's going to have a part in it, and obviously Francis, because now we've been eliminating players, and Salvatore Moroni is gone, and I'm interested in this Julian Rush guy. We'll see what his role is in the finale as well. But guys, that's episode 7. It was a bit of a shorter one as we head into the finale of the Penguin. But yeah, I mean, I'm just as excited as you guys are to see what happens here in this finale. Now, interestingly, I mentioned before we wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the big Batman-sized question that's going on here. Will Batman show up in the finale? And, I said before in maybe previous episodes when I was doing expectations for the Penguin, I said probably not. I feel like I gave it something like a 60% chance that he would not show up. So I was leaning more towards no. I'm still leaning more towards no, but I give it something like a 55 no to 45 yes. And the simple reason that my answer has changed more towards yes is because a bomb blew up in the city. And I know that Batman, so far, I feel like it's justifiable that Batman doesn't need to show up here, because, it's just sort of crime dealings, and he has much bigger things to worry about. But when a bomb goes off in the middle of the city, or at least, a neighborhood in the city, and I understand that maybe Batman is off doing other things, but feels like it should be on his radar, or at least Commissioner Gordon's radar. So we'll see. If he does show up, I would not expect it to be, I want to be very, very clear. I don't expect him to have 30 minutes of screen time in the finale if he does show up. I mean like a post-credit scene or something like that, where he is walking through the rubble of the bomb and he realizes that it's Penguin or something like that. That's the extent of what I think it would be. But again, I don't think he's going to be in the finale. I think the finale, wherever it leaves off, whether it's Sophia at the top, it could be Oz at the top, who knows? I think anything goes at this point, or maybe both of them struggling still for that top spot in the gang wars. I don't know. But wherever this show leaves off, I think that it will very much lead into the Batman Part 2. I would not be surprised at all if we get a very clear understanding of where these two characters sit and where they might be positioned to be in the Batman Part 2. Whether or not either or both of these characters have big roles to play in the second film, we'll have to see. But guys, that was episode 7 of The Penguin. We are fast approaching the end here. It's been just a crazy ride. I've been so glad to share it with you guys, and I can't wait to see what happens next week. So let me know in the comments, what did you think of episode 7? I'd love to hear your thoughts down there. All right, so this is completely unexpected, but we're here to talk about Star Wars episode 10, 11, 12, maybe? Let's dive into this because this is really interesting. So, Star Wars has been, well, it's been in a little bit of a state of turmoil, let's say. In the last week's episode of the Access Blockbusters pod, we talked about updates on all of the movies that Star Wars it's supposed to be working on, but then, we find out that the Rey Skywalker movie is being delayed because it lost its writer, but then James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi movie is moving along, we think, and then Mandalorian Grogu is coming out, so who knows where we are with those movies, honestly. It's just kind of all up in the air. But, the Rey Skywalker movie had been really interesting because it was a question of, okay, so if it's not episode 10, which is fine, it doesn't have to be episode 10, what is it, really? Is it just sort of a standalone thing they wanted to tell after episode 9? Is it sort of a redemption thing for Rey? Wait, what is this Rey Skywalker movie? And is it ever going to lead to an episode 10? Is episode 10 even going to be related to Rey Skywalker or the Skywalkers at all? I don't even know. It's really interesting, right? So then, the other day, news broke, and this is really interesting, that there are going to be 3 new Star Wars movies as part of a trilogy being developed by Simon Kinberg. And by the way, this is not a rumor because, I've said this many times on the Access Blockbusters pod and on the channel before. I don't cover scoops. I don't cover, scoopers as if they're news. Like, I'll talk about something a scooper said, like, in the past week I talked about the Midnight Suns rumored movie, not because it's news, but because I think it's fun to then speculate on other things related to that, like what I think the roster would be like, etc., etc. But this isn't a scoop. This is coming from Deadline and The Hollywood Reporter, which are, for those of you who don't follow the movie news trades that much, Deadline, Hollywood Reporter, Variety are very, very reliable sources. They almost always are correct. And even if the thing they report doesn't end up being true, eventually, it's almost always certain that what they heard at the time was what was true at the time. So this is pretty much as close to confirmation as you can get without Star Wars and Lucasfilm coming out and saying this is what's happening. So Simon Kinberg is developing a new trilogy of Star Wars movies that he is going to write and executive produce, it looks like. Okay, and now here it gets interesting, right? As Anakin Skywalker once infamously said, this is where the fun begins, because there are now conflicting reports between Deadline and The Hollywood Reporter about what this is going to look like. So I believe it was Deadline sources say that, in fact, these 3 films are going to be episodes 10, 11, and 12. Okay, interesting. I believe Deadline also said that these are not going to be a continuation, of the Skywalker saga and that they're going to be different. The Hollywood Reporter, I believe, is refuting that and saying that this is not going to be episodes 10 through 12, and it's obviously, if it's not episode 10 through 12, it's obviously not going to be part of the Skywalker saga. So they're on agreement on one thing. This is really not going to be a continuation of the Skywalker saga, whatever these 3 films are. And I think Deadline was the one who said there is still potential for characters from the Skywalker saga to show up. So, maybe this takes place 40 years later. I don't know if that means Daisy Ridley won't be coming back and it'll be a much older Rey or something like that. I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Because we know next to nothing about what this is. I mean, even the major trades, which are usually all in agreement, are disagreeing about what this is. So it's hard to say how far in the future this is going to be. It seems like if old characters could show up, it's not going to be 600 years in the future, which I honestly think could be kind of fun. I had this wild theory a while ago, you can check it out on the channel somewhere, that episode 10 was going to be, 600 years in the future, but Grogu was going to be the new Yoda, and it was kind of, George Lucas's famous quote, right? It's like poetry, it rhymes. Anyways, I don't think that's what's going to happen either. We'll see. But yeah, so that's interesting, right? Is it part of the Skywalker saga? Is it not? And then are old characters going to show up? Are they not? Is this episodes 10 through 12, or is it not? There are a lot of questions up in the air. So there are a couple things, in addition to that we should talk about here, because I think that this is interesting news. Like, what do we know for sure? We know for sure that, and I say for sure, as far as, Deadline and The Hollywood Reporter have confirmed, we know for sure, quote unquote, that there are going to be 3 new Star Wars movies as part of a trilogy, and Simon Kinberg is going to be writing and executive producing that. Now, the other big part of this is, so who is Simon Kinberg, right? For those of you who don't know who Simon Kinberg is, this is going to be some interesting context for you, because I think that based on who this person is, right? You'd feel differently if, for example, Aaron Sorkin said he was going to write another Star Wars movie, or Steven Spielberg was going to direct the next Star Wars movie, right? So who is Simon Kinberg? Well, Simon Kinberg, for those of you who have been following the comic book movie space, is actually one of the, I would say, more influential producers on a lot of the X-Men movies. I believe he was a producer on almost all of them. He wrote, and he wrote a lot for the X-Men films, and I'm going to list what he wrote because I think it's an interesting insight into, I don't know, maybe the level of quality we might be expecting, although maybe not, because obviously writers can have a good day and have a bad day, with their script, so who knows. But I think that the kinds of projects that he wrote for the X-Men franchise are quite interesting. He also directed an X-Men film, which we'll also talk about. And he also, in terms of Star Wars, executive produced and co-created, I believe, Star Wars Rebels. So that's the Star Wars connection there, right? I don't doubt that he's a Star Wars fan. Obviously, anyone coming into the Star Wars universe is, has to be at least a fan of the lore in some sense, right? So it's not like he's completely new and he's completely out of the loop there. But returning to the X-Men franchise, because if it's true that Simon Kinberg is going to be writing these films, which is it's what's been confirmed in this report, I think that we should go over what he has written, especially in terms of these big blockbuster projects, and then see how it stacks up here. So let's go through his credits here. I'm just going to go through the whole list here. So and I'm going to really only touch on the more notable ones here because I think that, there are some films here that I don't really recognize, but I think the more notable films here will have a kind of a bearing on what's going on here. So he wrote Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie kind of infamous movie. Pretty well received, I believe. I haven't seen it myself, but I believe it was pretty well received. The first X-Men movie, though, that he wrote is X-Men The Last Stand. Now, that is not great because most people seem to think that X-Men The Last Stand, myself included, is probably one of the weakest X-Men films that they produced. And I would tend to agree. It's not atrocious. And I'm sure, and actually not sure, I know there were a lot of other, bits of drama that went on with that film, especially with Brett Ratner, Bryan Singer. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure Simon Kinberg didn't have the easiest time, but he did write X-Men The Last Stand. He also wrote Jumper, though. And just checking out the Rotten Tomatoes score for Jumper, it has a 15%. So that is not encouraging at all. Again, every writer, every director can have, bad scripts that they write and bad movies that they direct. So it's not, it's not a nail in the coffin, as I'm sure we'll touch on in the next coming films. But it's just interesting. The next film he wrote was Sherlock Holmes, the one with Robert Downey Jr. And that one is actually, I haven't seen it, but it's a film that, is generally well received. So that's pretty good. He did not write X-Men First Class. He was a producer on X-Men First Class. Skipping down here, he wrote, then the next film he wrote is interesting. The next film he wrote is X-Men Days of Future Past. And this is interesting because the two films that I've highlighted thus far, X-Men The Last Stand and Jumper, well, actually 3 films. X-Men The Last Stand, not great. Jumper, pretty bad, according to critics. Sherlock Holmes, pretty good. X-Men The Last Stand, though, is, I maintain, one of the best comic book movies ever made. I love X-Men The Last Stand. And he wrote the film. And so we have to give him, he is the sole writer of X-Men Days of Future Past. That's a big credit to him, right? It shows that he is capable of doing really great things. And so I give him full credit for that. That's awesome. Then he wrote Fantastic Four, the Josh Trank Fantastic Four, which again, I know he seems to be getting himself in a lot of productions that are troubled. His Fantastic Four obviously had a really troubled production here. So, I mean, how much of it is his fault? I don't know, whatever. But he was a writer on Fantastic Four. So, yeah, there is that. The next film he wrote was X-Men Apocalypse. Again, one of the weaker X-Men films, I would say. But then he did produce some of the X-Men films that came after. He produced Logan, he produced Deadpool 2. So that's interesting, right? And then he made his directorial debut with Dark Phoenix. And I will say this. If Dark Phoenix is not the worst X-Men film I've seen, it is probably one of the worst X-Men films I've seen. It is, in my opinion, not great. And so the fact that he wrote and directed Dark Phoenix is something that gives me a lot of pause. It gives me a lot of pause here, especially heading into something like Star Wars. And that's pretty much, that's the extent of his credits here. Now, like I said, he wrote some episodes of Star Wars Rebels. He is an executive producer and co-creator of Star Wars Rebels. So that's also encouraging, at least for some, because I'm personally not a big fan of Star Wars Rebels. But for some, a lot of people love the show, and that's great. That's great. So we'll see about that. But again, I just am a little bit hesitant here on the Simon Kinberg front because, again, he's done some really great things, X-Men Days of Future Past, for example, but he's also not had the best track record of writing, producing, directing. So we'll see. It depends on who he gets to collaborate with and, who he surrounds himself with as he works on this project. But then, to close out this segment, let's get to the really, the elephant in the room here. Is this even gonna happen? And look, if you're out there and you believe with all your heart, you truly believe this is gonna happen, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. I can't bring myself to be at that point anymore, because just look at everything that Star Wars has done that they've canceled. Taika Waititi's film, who even knows? Kevin Feige and Michael Waldron had a film that was going to come out. That's not happening. Benioff and Weiss had a trilogy that was coming out. Rian Johnson had a trilogy. It's not even like these are individual films that got scrapped. Patty Jenkins had a film. These are trilogies. They planned trilogies with Benioff and Weiss, who did Game of Thrones, and with Rian Johnson, who obviously did The Last Jedi. They planned trilogies with them. So just because, there's this news report that comes out that says they're planning a trilogy, that to me, maybe normally, right? Not in Star Wars right now. It would be an indication like, oh, they're serious about this. But guys, they've canceled entire trilogies before just like that. And obviously not to mention the quote-unquote drama with Rogue One, which I love Rogue One, so it turned out great. But then the drama with Solo, A Star Wars Story, and all these other things, and Rise of Skywalker, and Last Jedi, and it's like all these things. I don't know. I'm not even talking about quality, right? We're not even going to talk about The Acolyte or anything like that, because those shows came out, Ahsoka. They came out, right? We're not even here to talk about, what I thought about those shows. You can check out all my thoughts on the YouTube channel. But just in terms of can they make it happen, I don't know. I really don't know. We just talked about last week that the Rey Skywalker movie was getting delayed, and it's like, when is enough, where we have to just be like, the boy has cried wolf, too many times. And I don't know. We'll have to see. So guys, there are a couple questions here. First of all, what do you think about this news that Simon Kinberg is going to be the one who is running this trilogy? Very interesting. Second question for you. Are you excited about the trilogy, and what do you think it's going to be? Is it going to be a Skywalker film? Is it going to be episodes 10 through 12? What do you think about that? But the third question, probably the most pessimistic question, is this even going to happen? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. And guys, that will do it for episode number 48 of the Access Blockbusters Pod. Thank you so much for joining. As always, it's a little bit of a shorter episode, and by short, I mean not an hour and a half. I know these episodes have been getting a little bit long, and so, I think it's just because there's so much to talk about, and there's a lot of exciting things going on, and I'm really excited. There are a lot of, by the way, great movies coming out in November that I'm hoping to review. I don't think I'll be able to review all of them literally the next day that they come out, like Moana 2, Gladiator 2, and Wicked. I'm really excited for those movies, though, so we'll be having a lot more to talk about, as well as, of course, Dune Prophecy, Creature Commandos coming up, and Skeleton Crew. So a lot of really exciting stuff, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you are listening on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe, give the video a like, and if you're listening on Spotify, give a rating, and most of all, just let me know in the comments what you think about any of these topics. That'll do it for me from this episode of Access Blockbusters Pod, and I will see you guys in the next one.